Have you ever seen a flame dancing in the wind? It bends, twists, and flutters, yet somehow it refuses to go out. Our hearts are much like that flame, vulnerable to the winds of manipulation and confusion, but capable of shining steadily when protected by God's truth. Today, let us embark on a path that requires discernment, courage, and surrender. How to respond to the narcissists in our lives without losing our peace or falling into their traps. There are moments when the urge to confront a narcissist feels overwhelming, to call out their distortions, demand justice, or expose their lies. But what if that confrontation draws us deeper into their web of frustration and confusion? What if God's wisdom points us not to fight through the storm, but to rise above it? Scripture tells us, "The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still." Exodus 14:14. This stillness is not passivity. It is a powerful act of faith, a decision to trust in divine justice rather than human confrontation, to establish boundaries that reflect our worth, and to seek a peace that surpasses all understanding. The illusion of clarity. Have you ever confronted someone hoping to clarify the truth, only to leave the conversation more confused and burdened? It's as if your words, like light reflected in a shattered mirror, come back distorted. What you intended as clarity turns into a haze of guilt and doubt. Confronting a narcissist often leads to unexpected, toxic outcomes that drain your soul rather than restore it. You might feel a surge of righteous indignation, a desire to unmask their manipulation or demand accountability. But instead of truth emerging, chaos unfolds. The narcissist deflects, attacks, or gaslights you into doubting your reality. It's like chasing a shadow. The closer you think you are, the farther it seems. Your good intentions become entangled in their distortions, leaving you feeling defeated. The enemy's subtle traps, c.s.lewis, in the Screwtape Letters, warns that the enemy often twists our good desires into traps. Our yearning for accountability, when mishandled, becomes an open door for harm. This doesn't excuse the narcissist's behavior, it is unjustifiable, but it highlights the futility of seeking resolution through direct confrontation with someone who thrives on distortion. The Bible offers wisdom here. Do not answer a fool according to his folly, or you yourself will be just like him. Proverbs 26:4. Calling out a narcissist might feel like the right step toward justice, but it often descends into a futile argument, robbing you of God's peace. Strength in stillness. This does not mean surrendering to passivity. On the contrary, it is strength. Recognizing that some battles are not ours to fight head-on allows us to step back and reclaim our peace. By refusing to engage in their endless cycles of distortion and defense, we deny them power over our spirit. Walking away from the confrontation does not mean walking away from justice. It means entrusting the battle to God, the ultimate arbiter of truth. This shift opens the door to healthier choices, stronger boundaries, and perhaps even the freedom you've been longing for. But what patterns should we recognize in their behavior? How can we protect ourselves when their actions leave us doubting even our own reality? Finding stability in a world of shifting sands. Have you ever felt like you're walking on shifting sands, desperately searching for stability in a relationship that leaves you perpetually off balance? You might try to build trust, hoping to create a bond rooted in understanding, but their ever-changing nature prevents anything solid from taking form. It's as if each step toward stability brings you back to the same patterns of confusion and uncertainty. C.S. Lewis once warned of the dangers of illusions and false foundations in Mere Christianity. He reminds us that anything built on a lie will inevitably collapse. The narcissist's reality is one of self-preservation, where truth bends to serve their ego. When they sense their control slipping, they reshape the narrative to restore their sense of superiority. This constant shifting keeps you in a state of anxiety, forever questioning what is real and what is fabrication. The words of Jesus in Matthew 7:26 ring loud and clear. Everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house on sand. Building a relationship with someone who refuses to acknowledge the truth is like constructing on shifting sand. The foundation will never hold. The walls of hope you raise will inevitably crumble under the weight of their inconsistency. But God calls us to solid ground, to relationships rooted in truth, humility, and love. He offers a foundation that does not change with the winds of ego or the storms of pride. When caught in the shifting sands of manipulation, remember that true stability comes from standing on God's unchanging word. By ceasing to strive for stability where none can exist, we open ourselves to the firm foundation of divine wisdom and peace. The trap of confrontation. There was once a hunter who set a trap so cleverly hidden that even the wisest of creatures would stumble into it. The bait was enticing, a glimmer of hope, a promise of resolution. But once the prey took that step, the snare tightened, and escape seemed impossible. Confronting a narcissist with the hope of fixing them or exposing their lies is like stepping into such a trap. What seems like a path to healing becomes a web of emotional and spiritual entanglement. The more you focus on fixing their behavior or revealing their deception, the deeper you fall into the negativity they create. Their tactics, gaslighting, blame shifting, and emotional manipulation tighten the snare around you. You may begin to question your worth, your discernment, and even your relationship with God. This is the enemy's goal: to keep you trapped, distracted, and spiritually depleted. C.s.Lewis, in the Screw Tape Letters, illustrates how demons delight in keeping us focused on the faults of others while neglecting our own souls. By making us obsess over someone else's lies or toxicity, they pull us away from God's light and truth. This obsession becomes a spiritual trap where our minds and hearts are consumed by frustration, bitterness, or despair. The more we wrestle with the darkness, the more it envelops us. The Apostle Paul warns in 2 Corinthians 2:11, "We are not unaware of Satan's schemes." The demonic trap here is subtle. It invites you to fight for justice, but in a way that drains your soul and undermines your faith. The battle you think you are waging for truth becomes a battleground where your own peace and clarity are at risk. But God does not ask you to entangle yourself in this endless struggle. Instead, He offers a way out, a path of discernment and surrender. By stepping away and giving the situation to Him, you avoid the trap and preserve your soul. When we resist the urge to fix what only God can heal, we step into the freedom that He alone can give. The wisdom in withdrawal. A gardener knows that some weeds are so deeply rooted that pulling them out by force will only damage the surrounding soil. Instead, he cuts off their access to light and water, allowing nature to wither them away. Similarly, dealing with a narcissist requires wisdom. Sometimes the best approach is not confrontation, but withdrawal of the emotional resources that enable their behavior. The biblical path calls us to break unhealthy bonds, resist codependency, and entrust the situation to God's hands. God does not call us to endlessly confront those who refuse to change. Instead, He invites us to guard our hearts and set boundaries that reflect our worth in His eyes. Galatians 5:1 reminds us, "It is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Stand firm, then, and do not let yourselves be burdened again by a yoke of slavery." The cycle of manipulation and distortion is a form of bondage. By stepping back, you break free from this toxic yoke and reclaim the freedom Christ offers. C.s. Lewis wisely noted, Relying on God has to begin all over again every day, as if nothing had yet been done. This daily surrender is key. Instead of expending energy on fruitless confrontation, we surrender the narcissist to God's justice. His ways are higher, His timing perfect. Where our interventions fail, God's intervention prevails. He sees every manipulation, every distortion, and every hurt. Trusting Him means believing that He will handle the situation far better than we ever could. Freedom in boundaries, breaking codependent patterns, is not about giving up on love or compassion. It is about recognizing that true love respects boundaries and honors the image of God within you. When you resist the urge to fix someone who refuses responsibility, you honor both your dignity and God's sovereignty. This is not weakness. It is spiritual strength rooted in trust. By choosing God's path, you allow Him to work behind the scenes in ways you cannot see. As you step away from confrontation, you begin to walk toward peace and freedom that only God's wisdom can provide. A bird trapped in a snare struggles fiercely, exhausting itself in vain. But when it finally stops fighting and waits, the hand of its rescuer gently loosens the trap, setting it free. In the same way, peace and freedom are often found not through relentless struggle, but through the quiet strength of surrender and boundaries. God's wisdom teaches us that true peace is not the absence of conflict, but the presence of clarity and boundaries. Philippians 4:7 promises, "The peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." This peace isn't born of confrontation, but of trust. Trust that God will guard your heart when you set healthy limits and refuse to be drawn into endless cycles of blame and distortion. Setting boundaries is an act of self-respect and faith. It means recognizing your worth in God's eyes and protecting the spiritual gifts He has entrusted to you. When you say no to toxic behavior, you say yes to God's peace. It is in this space of freedom that you can rebuild your spirit, regain your clarity, and walk in the truth of who God created you to be. C.S. Lewis observed, "A man can no more diminish God's glory by refusing to worship Him than a lunatic can put out the sun by scribbling darkness on the walls of his cell." The narcissist's attempts to distort your reality do not change the truth of who you are. By stepping back, you refuse to let their darkness define you. You reclaim the light of God's truth, where peace and freedom flourish. This journey of setting boundaries and trusting God is not an easy one. But as you walk it, the weight of guilt, confusion, and frustration begins to lift. In that newfound freedom, you discover a life no longer bound by their chaos, but anchored in God's unshakable peace. A final word of encouragement. Dear friends, the journey of dealing with a narcissist is challenging. The traps of manipulation, the distortion of reality, and the endless cycles of confrontation can leave you exhausted and disheartened. But God, in His wisdom, offers you a better way. He invites you to step back, set boundaries, and trust Him to bring justice in His perfect timing. Remember that your worth is not determined by someone else's behavior or twisted perceptions. Your identity is anchored in God's truth. Psalm 62:6 reminds us, "He alone is my rock and my salvation, my fortress where I will not be shaken." When you set your boundaries and give the struggle to God, you are not giving up. You are standing firm on the unshakable foundation of His peace. As you reflect on this message, ask yourself, are you pouring energy into a cycle that God is asking you to step away from? Have you mistaken confrontation for healing when God is offering you freedom through surrender? If this message resonates with you, declare, "I choose God's peace over toxic chaos." Share this encouragement with others who may need it and step forward into the peace and freedom God promises.